This video is sponsored by me and my Vampire Buddy Cop mystery series. Stay tuned to the end of the video to learn how you can get the first 4 chapters completely free. We've all heard the old adage, show, don't tell. It's an infamous one-liner hung in many classrooms and espoused in several videos or articles throughout the writing community. But what does it mean? Sure, on its face, the idea seems easy.
A little too easy.
The whole concept is to use subtle context to communicate ideas like emotion, environment, or world building to the audience without directly stating things like, by the way, this world has something dangerous that could eat you. Or, hey, this guy can't talk and now he's sad, in an outright manner. This is, in theory, the best kind of writing because it's more realistic to the human experience. We go through our day using our minds to process constant sensations and information to reach our conclusions, with only a very limited amount of that being done with outright exposition from a third party. Unless you're in school, life is hardly one big lecture hall after another. We have to deal with things like tone, gesture, the environment, and prior context, all while processing the conversation before us. And we do this seamlessly, so it's not exactly shocking that writing this way is more immersive. But this is where things get complicated and writers tend to hit a brick wall. Writing in itself is telling. A movie or comic may have visuals, but novels and short stories rely on language and communication. Show don't tell is a lovely concept, but at the end of the day, you still have to use words, and this leaves many of us wondering, how? In my recent interview with young adult author Ellie Maureen, we discussed setting the scene and using emotion in the senses. I'll link that video at the end, and I definitely recommend it. But the only part you need to understand where I'm going with this is, if you're a writer and you're trying to paint this picture in a reader's head, where do you think you're focusing?
Yeah, for this one, I would emphasize sound because the silence is so profound. So in consequence, every sound, even the minute ones, are also profound. I think the hum of the lights and electricity and the intermittent sniffles across the room, even the jangle of the keys from the man who comes up to put the bag over John's head, just like comes out at you. And I think that if you're just like focusing on those sounds and how everyone is just kind of holding their breath.
Ellie's insight here got me thinking. How do we tell a story when silence is an integral part of the narrative and the story structure? To answer this question, we'll be looking at 2 films, Silent Night and A Quiet Place. Obligatory spoiler warning to avoid rage comments below, but both of these films practically eliminate dialogue with less than 10 spoken conversations between the 2 of them. First, we'll look at how the storytellers eliminate the dialogue and exposition while keeping the whole narrative natural. We'll review how this changed communication between characters impacted the audience. Then we'll consider areas where writers use supplementary communication such as text or newspapers and why these ideas might have required a written format. And finally, what we can take away from this to improve our own writing. With all that, let's get started with Part 1, Silence is Golden. While these 2 movies share a change in sense, i.e. removing dialogue as the primary communication, A Quiet Place is a thriller similar to Bird Box in the sense that the monster is forcing everyone in the world to live in a fundamentally different way than before, only instead of sight, it's sound. Essentially, the writers create a world where sound in itself is deadly. All characters experience this to varying degrees, even a newborn child. As a result, there are all of 2 conversations in this whole film, and the rest is either subtext through body language or American Sign Language. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Silent Night, which is a basic revenge movie about a man who loses his child and voice during a gang-related shooting. Now, it would be fine just to watch this man struggle to communicate while everyone else around him continues on. But the writers decide to take dialogue off the table for the entire cast. Seriously, there are maybe 5 lines of dialogue throughout the entire film, and this includes background conversations with unrelated information. The writers didn't need to do this. It wasn't necessary for the revenge plot and most likely complicated the writing process. So this was a conscious decision rather than a derivative of the story. And despite the lack of necessity in this choice, the result is the same. The audience can't simply put either of these movies going in the background while they make dinner. The entire experience is shifted and the audience is forced to engage with the material in a fundamentally different way than normal. Very similar to the old black and white movies where you actually had to read the dialogue on screen. This is primarily because of Part 2, When You Can't Talk the Talk. There are some sparse moments where characters are communicating through either ASL or text. In both cases, the audience has to both read the words and interpret the tone for themselves through body language and reactions. Rather similar to how we used to experience movies during the silent movie era. Sure, seeing a text on a screen is nothing new, but it's usually a quick 2-sentence communication, the movie equivalent of OMG. And while the meaning can be profound, the actual content of most texts is short-lived because the characters actually have something to say and communicate. But in both our examples, we're not just reading the screen. Our senses are more in tune with the characters and their body language because we as the audience know we're not getting any more detail about this later. This conversation is it. Because of this, we're tensed, focused, trying to absorb the tiniest expression or choice these characters make to discern their intentions, mental states, and even the dangers they are facing. No one has to scream or even cry for us to understand their very real fear. And when they do make a sound, we understand that that fear or pain has spiraled into a completely new depth without being told a damn thing. One might even argue this forces us to empathize with the characters on a far more realistic level as we engage with the material. But aside from all of this, there's one more form of direct communication with the audience. Part 3, the necessity of exposition. Unlike the prior example of characters finding ways to communicate without speech, there's one area of text that is more natural to the world building. This comes in the form of newspapers, whiteboards, and books. They're used as a delicate form of exposition. Our protagonist can't just talk to his wife about his struggles rebuilding a hearing aid. Instead, we see him reading a book about the human ear as he works on the device. And if we can't explain that the opening gun violence was gang-related, a newspaper article will do the trick. The key here is a light touch. Heavy, it can dip into melodrama. Boy, there's a lesson in writing right there. Moving on. At the end of Silent Night, the protagonist writes a letter to his estranged wife apologizing for everything. It's pretty long, and they show the whole thing on screen. I personally think this was a mistake. I think it would have added more depth if I was forced to think about what that letter might have said. Well, he might have said goodbye, or if he was maybe hoping for a second chance when he was done. In a movie where I was encouraged to think, imagine, and empathize just to follow the story, being spoon-fed the exact character motions at the end was kind of a letdown. Summary. As with any writing advice, there is nuance and personal taste. But if you're trying to make your writing more subtle, and maybe understand what the hell your English teacher is yapping on about, then here are some basic takeaways from both Silent Night and A Quiet Place. Pare down dialogue to the bare necessities.
Look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife.
This may be easier during edits, but take time to review each line and think if characters can express these same ideas in gestures such as storming off or maybe sharing a favorite song before they pull their loved one in for a dance. Actions often speak volumes. If you have to tell the audience something, consider using world building for the exposition, and remember we don't need everything. No one human knows everything about the entire world, and your audience isn't here for a history class. If your world has a unique element or history, just introduce it and let the characters interact with it naturally. This leaves room for mystery instead of boring the audience or condescending to them.
He's escaping on a bicycle powered by love, which is an ordinary thing on this planet.
When you do need dialogue, keep it simple. This doesn't mean avoiding all tangents or fun conversations. These can add depth to the character and flesh them out for an audience. But just like sprinkles on dessert, they should be used sparingly. Actually, scratch that, sprinkles suck, but the rest of my point remains valid. At the end of the day, it will always be your story, and someone will love it. But what kind of exposition and storytelling do you prefer? And what are some new silent movies you'd recommend? Leave your suggestions below, and don't forget to comment and subscribe. And if you'd like to listen to the first 4 chapters of Blood Herring completely free, just click this playlist to go to my main channel or scan the QR code for a free PDF. No mailing list, no spam. Give this indie author a shot and help keep this content running. Happy writing and Merry Christmas.